The grand chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting golden reflections on the polished mahogany floors. Waiters in crisp black suits weaved through the crowd, offering champagne and delicate crystal flutes. The room hummed with conversations, filled with deep, rolling laughter and the occasional sharp clap of a handshake sealing a deal. The air smelled of leather, expensive cigars, and the faint scent of horses that had been groomed to perfection. It was the kind of place where fortunes were flaunted and reputations were built or shattered with a single bid. Jack stood at the back, his calloused fingers tightening around the faded brim of his hat. His clothes, worn from years of hard labor, marked him as an outsider in this world of wealth and prestige. He had always known he didn't belong here, but that didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for a horse. The auction had been going on for hours, and the bidding wars had been fierce. Purebred stallions with impeccable bloodlines had sold for hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions. The crowd's energy surged with each call from the auctioneer, the numbers rising higher and higher with every flick of a numbered paddle. Jack had watched it all in silence, his heart steady, his focus unwavering. He knew his moment hadn't come yet. A sharp voice cut through the murmur of the audience. "Next up, ladies and gentlemen, we have something a little different." The auctioneer's tone shifted, a slight hesitation lacing his words. The large wooden doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and a handler led a horse into the spotlight. A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience, quickly followed by a wave of disinterest. The horse was a stark contrast to the gleaming, muscular champions that had come before it. His ribs pressed against his dull, chestnut coat, his mane tangled and unkempt. A noticeable limp hindered his steps, his gait uneven as he followed the handler. His eyes, large and dark, held no fire, no defiance, only exhaustion. This was an animal that had been beaten by life, cast aside, forgotten. Jack felt his throat tighten. He knew that look all too well. The auctioneer sighed, adjusting his glasses. "All right, let's start the bidding at 200. A few chuckles echoed through the room. No one moved. The silence was louder than any bid had been that night. Jack swallowed hard. He could hear the whispers around him, the subtle smirks from men in tailored suits who saw nothing more than a pathetic, broken animal. He straightened his spine. His hand went up. A single bid. Laughter erupted. The crowd turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from amused to outright mocking. A woman in a floor-length gown nudged her companion, whispering behind her gloved hand. A man near the front chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on now." A voice called from the side. "What's the point? That thing isn't worth the dirt on my boots." Jack ignored them. His eyes were locked on the horse. The animal, despite the noise and the humiliation, stood there without protest, his ears flicking back as though resigned to his fate. Jack clenched his jaw. No creature should have to feel that kind of defeat. Another voice joined the taunts. "Tell you what, I'll go against him. 300. The words dripped with sarcasm. The voice belonged to a man Jack recognized, Mr. Lancaster. He was one of the wealthiest horse owners in the region, known for his ruthless attitude and his disdain for anything that didn't bring him immediate prestige. His smirk was sharp, his confidence unshaken. Jack's pulse quickened. He didn't have money to waste. Every dollar mattered. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. He raised his hand again. 400. More laughter. Mr. Lancaster's smile widened, but his eyes glinted with something else, entertainment. He was toying with Jack, making a spectacle of him. 500, he drawled. Jack's fingers curled into a fist at his side. He could walk away. Let Lancaster win. Let the horse disappear into whatever miserable fate awaited him. But he couldn't do it. 600. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was no longer just a joke. Now it was a scene. People turned to watch, their amusement shifting into curiosity. Lancaster's smirk faltered for just a second. Then he laughed, shaking his head. "You're a fool," he said, dropping his paddle. The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium. "Sold for $600. Jack exhaled, his chest tightening. He had won. The crowd slowly lost interest, shifting their attention to the next item up for bid. Jack stepped forward, his boots scuffing against the polished floor. The horse's handler handed him the lead rope without a word, barely hiding his disbelief. Up close, Rusty looked even worse. His coat bore scars, some old, some fresh. His breathing was shallow, as if even standing required effort. Jack reached out, running a gentle hand along the animal's neck. Rusty flinched at first, but didn't pull away. "Don't worry, boy," Jack murmured. "You're safe now." A snort of disbelief came from behind him. "Safe?" Lancaster's voice held no shortage of mockery. "That thing's a lost cause, just like you." Jack didn't respond. He simply tightened his grip on the rope and led Rusty out of the auction house. The night air was cold against his skin. The sounds of the auction faded behind him as he walked toward his truck, the worn-down trailer hitched to the back. Rusty hesitated at the ramp, shifting nervously. Jack gave him time. He didn't tug, didn't force him. He simply waited. After a few moments, Rusty took a shaky step forward. Then another. Jack secured the trailer and climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. He had spent every last dollar he had. He had no safety net, no fallback plan. But none of that mattered. He had made his choice. As the truck rumbled to life, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Rusty stood still in the trailer, his head lowered. A broken horse. A foolish man. Jack let out a slow breath. They were going to prove everyone wrong. The drive home was long, the road stretching endlessly before him, illuminated only by the truck's dim headlights. Jack kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other occasionally tapping against the dashboard in thought. The weight of what he had done settled heavily on his shoulders. He had spent every last cent on a horse no one believed in, and now the real work would begin. The soft rustling from the trailer behind him kept him grounded. Rusty shifted uneasily, his hooves scraping against the metal floor, but he wasn't panicked. That was a good sign. Jack knew the horse had been through more than he could imagine, and trust would not come easily. It never did. He understood that better than most. The moment he pulled up to his small, weather-worn ranch, exhaustion seeped into his bones. The place was nothing special, just a modest barn, a few acres of fenced pasture, and a house that had seen better days. But it was home. He stepped out into the cold night air, stretching his stiff muscles before moving to the trailer. When he opened the back gate, Rusty didn't move. His large, dark eyes stared out at the unfamiliar surroundings, his ears twitching at the distant sounds of crickets and the soft rustling of trees in the wind. Jack didn't rush him. He simply stood beside the trailer, holding the lead rope loosely in his hand. Minutes passed before Rusty finally took a cautious step forward. Then another. His hooves met the ground with hesitant certainty, and he let out a slow exhale. Jack could see the uncertainty in his stance, the way his body remained tense, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. He had likely been mistreated for far too long. Jack led him toward the barn, his steps slow and deliberate. The other horses in the nearby pasture lifted their heads, their curious gazes following the new arrival. Rusty's ears flicked back, but he didn't panic. That was another good sign. Inside the barn, Jack guided him into a freshly prepared stall. The bedding was clean, the water bucket filled, and a pile of hay sat in the corner. Rusty sniffed the air cautiously before stepping inside. Jack removed the halter and let the horse take in his new surroundings on his own terms. Leaning against the stall door, Jack watched him for a long moment. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he said softly. "Not to them. Not to me." Rusty didn't respond, of course, but Jack liked to believe he understood in some way. He turned away, leaving the horse to settle in for the night. The next morning, the real work began. Jack woke before the sun, as he always did, pulling on his worn boots and stepping out into the crisp morning air. The ranch was quiet, save for the distant sound of birds beginning their day. When he reached the barn, Rusty was standing near the stall door, his dark eyes watching Jack carefully. He didn't bolt to the back of the stall. That was progress. Jack moved slowly, making sure not to startle him. He spoke in a low, even voice, narrating his actions as he worked. "Just gonna clean out your stall," he murmured, grabbing a pitchfork. "You don't have to do anything but stand there." Rusty did just that. He watched. He flinched slightly when Jack moved too quickly, but he didn't panic. Every moment without fear was a step in the right direction. After finishing the morning chores, Jack grabbed a halter and lead rope. This was the part he wasn't sure about. He needed to get Rusty out of the stall, needed to start working with him in the open space of the round pen. But he knew pushing too hard, too fast, would break whatever fragile trust he had built. He stepped into the stall, keeping his posture relaxed. "Let's go for a walk, huh?" Rusty's ears flicked back, his muscles tensing. Jack didn't force it. He held the halter out, waiting. Seconds stretched into minutes before Rusty finally took a step forward. Jack remained patient, his hand steady. When the horse allowed the halter to slip over his nose, Jack fastened it gently, giving him a moment to adjust before leading him out. The round pen was empty, the dirt soft beneath their feet. Jack let the lead rope hang loose, giving Rusty enough space to move freely. The horse's eyes darted around, his nostrils flaring as he took in his surroundings. Jack clicked his tongue softly. "Easy." Rusty took a hesitant step forward, then another. Jack moved with him, keeping his pace steady. He wasn't asking for much, just movement, just a little trust. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the ranch. Jack worked with Rusty for nearly an hour, never pushing, never demanding. The horse was hesitant, wary, but he didn't shut down. That was what mattered. Days turned into weeks, and small victories piled up. Rusty began stepping out of his stall, without hesitation. He allowed Jack to brush his coat, to lift his hooves, to lead him without resistance. The limp that had been so pronounced when Jack first saw him was fading, the result of good care, proper feeding, and gentle exercise. But trust was a delicate thing. One afternoon, as Jack worked with Rusty in the round pen, something spooked the horse. A sudden gust of wind slammed the barn door shut with a loud bang, and before Jack could react, Rusty reared up, eyes wild with panic. Jack moved back instinctively, giving the horse space, but the damage was done. Rusty bolted toward the fence, his hooves kicking up dirt as he tried to escape the invisible threat. Jack's got twisted. He had seen this kind of fear before. "Rusty," he called, his voice calm despite the situation. "It's all right." The horse skidded to a stop near the fence, his body trembling. Jack didn't move toward him. He simply waited. Long seconds passed before Rusty turned, his eyes still wide, but his breathing slowing. Jack took a careful step forward, then another. He extended a hand, palm open, offering reassurance. Rusty hesitated, then did something Jack hadn't expected. He took a step toward him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He didn't reach out, didn't push for more. He simply stood there, letting Rusty make the choice. After another moment, the horse lowered his head slightly. It wasn't complete trust. Not yet, but it was enough. Jack let out a slow breath, his lips curving into a small, knowing smile. They were getting there. The day of the competition arrived with a sky painted in hues of amber and gold, the morning sun casting long shadows across the arena. Jack tightened the cinch on Rusty's saddle, his hand steady despite the anticipation buzzing through him. The crowd had already begun gathering, voices murmuring with curiosity and speculation. They hadn't forgotten the scene at the auction. Jack could feel their eyes on him as he led Rusty toward the holding area. Whispers floated through the crisp air, laced with amusement and doubt. They still saw a broken horse, an animal that had no business being in a place like this. Rusty's ears flicked back at the noise, his muscles tensing slightly beneath Jack's hand. He gave the lead rope a gentle tug, his voice low and even. "Ignore them, buddy. They don't know you." Rusty exhaled sharply but followed without hesitation. It was a small thing, but to Jack, it meant everything. The competition was fierce. Prized horses with gleaming coats and powerful strides, riders dressed in immaculate attire, their confidence worn as plainly as their expensive boots. Jack was a stark contrast to them, his clothes worn but clean, his hat pulled low over his brow. He had never needed fancy things to prove his worth. One by one, the riders entered the arena, showcasing their horses with practiced ease. The crowd cheered, nodding in approval at the seamless performances. Jack waited, his fingers running absently over Rusty's mane, feeling the warmth beneath them. This was it, the moment that would define everything. When his name was finally called, He took a breath and swung into the saddle. Rusty shifted beneath him, but didn't resist. The two of them moved as one toward the center of the arena. The murmurs grew louder. Jack knew what they were thinking. He straightened his back, lifted his chin. Let them doubt. The signal was given, and Jack nudged Rusty forward. The horse hesitated for the briefest second, his ears twitching, but then he moved, his steps smooth and controlled. Jack guided him through the course with precision, each movement calculated, each transition seamless. The crowd, once buzzing with skepticism, fell into a hushed silence. Rusty moved with a grace that defied expectation, his strides powerful, his frame collected. He was no longer the frightened, limping horse they had dismissed. He was something more, something undeniable. Jack could feel the shift in the air. The disbelief was fading, replaced by something else, something dangerously close to admiration. He and Rusty moved through the final section, executing the last maneuver with flawless ease. When they came to a halt, the silence held for a long, suspended moment before the first smattering of applause broke through. Then another, and another. Jack reached down, running a hand along Rusty's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. They had done it. As they exited the arena, a man stepped forward, his polished boots kicking up small puffs of dust. Jack recognized him instantly. One of the wealthiest horse breeders in the state, a man who had openly laughed at him during the auction. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive jacket, eyes fixed on Rusty with a calculating gleam. "That's quite the turnaround," he mused, his tone bordering on reluctant admiration. Didn't think he had it in him. Jack met his gaze, his expression unreadable. He always had it in him. The man's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll make you an offer. A generous one." Jack already knew what his answer would be. He reached down, giving Rusty's neck a firm but gentle pat, before shaking his head. "He's not for sale." Surprise flickered across the man's face, followed quickly by understanding. He gave a curt nod before stepping back, blending once more into the crowd. Jack guided Rusty away, the sounds of celebration echoing behind them. He didn't need anyone else's validation. He never had. Rusty wasn't just a horse he had saved. Rusty had saved him too.